Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you tips and tricks and advice from experts across the state. We talk about all things vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope this show is something that you'll look forward to listening to every week. Episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcasts, and we also air on the radio here in Utah on 860 AM KKAT at 10 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday. So if you're listening to this show on the radio, you can listen to past episodes on Apple Podcasts. Just look up the podcast app if you have an iPhone and search for Gardening Utah. Hit that subscribe button and you can catch up on all past episodes. This will be episode 21. And you can also get a notification every time a new episode drops. Or of course, you can listen right here on 860 AM KKAT or at 860kkat.com. So, we hope that this show is fun and informative and gives you all the types of gardening inspiration and tips and tricks that you need so that when you are out in the garden, you're inspired, or when you're out shopping at nurseries and garden centers, you can plug us in, listen to your podcast over your earbuds, and you can stay in the know on all the tasks that you need to accomplish in the garden this week. Now, you can also find us on Instagram. You can look us up there. We are at Gardening Utah, as well as on Facebook. So you can always let me know what you'd like to see on the show there as well. Send me a direct message, comment on our latest photos, let us know what you'd like to see, and we can have one of our experts answer your question on an upcoming show. Okay, all of the intros are out of the way, and Utah, what happened this week? On today's show, we are going to be lamenting what just happened to most of us in northern Utah. We're going to talk about what you can do if you are one of the thousands of people impacted by loss of a tree or loss of many trees or loss of branches or you name it. I mean, we're kind of mourning in this show all the beautiful, incredible trees that we've lost. Over 1,000 trees in northern Utah. I mean, I'm sure the number's more now. Those are just the ones that toppled, and that's a rough estimate. But how devastating. It makes me sick to my stomach on the history we've lost and the beauty we've lost and the change in the landscape as we walk around our homes and our parks and just our streets, driving up and down the places we know and love, how much it's going to be different up into the future is just devastating. But what I hope today's show can do is give us some advice on what we can do moving forward. I know that a lot of us lost maybe some trees that, let's be honest, we wanted to come down anyway. Maybe that pesky Chinese elm or that cottonwood that fills your driveway and your garage with that white cotton all spring. Well, you know what? All we can do is move forward. So we're going to talk about some things we can do, some maybe new varieties of trees. We're going to talk with Cameron Alcott from progressiveplants.com, and he's going to give us some beautiful varieties that we can get excited about replanting in places that are now, once our trees are removed, going to be, let's be honest, big ruts in the soil. So we're going to talk about how we can mix up our biodiversity with maybe some totally different, more improved varieties that can really help us as a whole as we move in to planting all of these new varieties, because Cameron's going to talk about how sometimes having too much of one tree is a bad thing because of disease and that kind of a thing. So we're going to mix it up a little. We're going to give some great new varieties, not necessarily new, but just new to you because it might not have been in that spot. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about planting tips so that when you do get new trees in the ground, how to do it right. And we're going to get into all of that in today's episode. But first, you know what time it is. Here's the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is what in the world to do for your crops when there's going to be a frost or a freeze. Now, Mother Nature really hit us hard in this northern Utah last week, did it not? Between the devastating winds that decimated a lot of our trees, shrubs, and gardens in many cases. We also, in many areas, got hit with a frost or a freeze. Boy, has it been a week. So let's talk about a frost and a freeze. So a frost is defined as a covering of minute ice needles that forms on surfaces at or below freezing. Even if the actual temperature isn't freezing, a wind chill can cause the moisture in a plant to freeze. And a frost also has come to mean a brief dip in temperatures to freezing or just below with or without ice crystals. So a freeze, on the other hand, occurs when the temperature drops well below freezing and may or may not include ice crystals. So the amount of time below freezing to warrant a freeze warning varies depending on your geography. So freeze warnings are issued when temperatures will be below freezing for a sufficient amount of time to do damage to vegetation. So what's the difference between a frost and a freeze? Well, frost occurs on a cold, clear, still night as the heat radiates from surfaces into the air and the temperature drops below 32 degrees and water vapor freezes on those surfaces. So a light covering of hay, a slight overhang of a tree, or anything like a blanket on top of your tomatoes, like I did, anything that helps hold air will prevent too much damage from a frost because it helps hold the slight bit of heat released as the moisture freezes. And the reason most frost happens on clear nights is because the clouds and fog help hold heat closer to the earth, usually preventing a frost. So clear nights carry more risk of a frost. Now, a freeze is when very cold air blows into the area and the air is colder than freezing, which is 32 degrees, and there is wind and the humidity is very low. So a freeze warning is issued for 3 or more hours of temperatures that are going to be between 27 and 32 degrees over a widespread area. And that is when you got to get out there and you got to cover your plants or move those indoors, anything that's cold sensitive that you want to survive that freeze. And then a wind chill advisory means that very cold air and gusty winds will combine to generate low wind chills. So both can cause damage to most vegetation, but you can survive certain circumstances depending on weather, and that's why it's important to really understand the difference between a frost and a freeze. So keep an eye on that weather forecast. Don't be afraid to get out there and cover your plants, especially if better weather is on the horizon, as what happened to us in Utah this week. And that was the tip of the week.
Never miss a tip for your garden. Never miss a tip for your garden. And never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
All right, Utah, when we come back right after this break, we're going to have Cameron Alcott with Progressive Plants, and we're going to talk about what to do with all these down trees, how to make the best out of the situation and plant something new. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me here is Cameron Alcott from Progressive Plants. Thanks for joining me on this crazy day, Cameron.
Oh, I know. It's been crazy lately, hasn't it?
What a week here in Utah. My word, we lost 1,000, I guess that's the last estimate I saw, over 1,000 trees.
Oh, it's insane. I mean, and they're big trees too, like huge.
So,
like the ones that are up at the Capitol and Liberty Park and old areas up in like Holiday and Federal Heights area. I mean, I just couldn't believe the devastation on the pictures that I've seen.
I really can't either. I mean, my sister lives in Sugar House, and almost her whole street, every single tree came down, and trees that have just been there for ages and ages. It just makes me so sad. How are we going to replace all these trees?
I know that's the most frustrating thing over all of it is, these trees are not going to be replaced in our lifetimes. I mean, the best that we can do is plant now and then hope that our children and our grandchildren, get to experience at least a fraction of what we experience, walking down, like the center of like Liberty Park or going up to the Capitol and avenues areas where we could just see these trees that were, 100 years old.
Oh.
It's just so sad.
It really is. It's just devastating. And I did hear something that made me feel just a little bit better, but not all the way. That I heard on the news that some of these trees that came down because of obvious problems that were going on with the tree that, made it to where it was going to have to be taken down eventually. I mean, obviously most trees have to eventually anyway, but, talking about maybe there was a fungus in the root system that made it super easy to just get yanked out by some wind. What do you think on that?
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, trees do have a finite lifespan. Not everything lives for 1,000 years. Like a lot of your cottonwood trees, I mean, you'll get, maybe 60 to maybe 100 years out of those things. So that's relatively short-lived, like ginkgos will live like, 500 to 600 years. Bristlecone pines could live up to 5,000 or 6,000, I think was the last time that I looked at those, but those are few and far between.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of the trees, like once they get that mature age, 50 to 75 to 100, 120 years, they can start to get some problems over time. Especially the ones like, cottonwoods that are kind of prone to diseases anyway. One of the things that I did notice when I was looking at all the pictures of all the devastation is where they're located in people's yards. And how water is getting applied to them. I noticed most of these trees happen to be in like lawn areas where, if you have any experience with trees and irrigation is lawn requires a lot more water than trees do. And when you water frequently to keep your lawn green, the tree roots have a tendency to stay a lot more on the surface. And also the soil is usually wet a lot of times. And, I was using the analogy earlier where, what's easier to dig into? Is it easier to dig into like wet soil and dirt or really dry, hard pan type clay?
Yeah.
And if it's wet, as we're watering our lawns, if you get like some strong winds, it's not unusual for those trees to, act like parachutes at that point. And, the soil is really loose and wet, it's just going to fall right over. So that's why, most people who are like, in the landscaping world or active with like, say like local scapes or the conservation garden, the message that we've been pushing out lately has been, try to not put trees in lawns because the water requirements are different and stuff like this is a little bit more preventable. When you have 112 mile per hour winds, the damage is going to happen. But that way, if it's 112 mile per hour wind, great, that's once in a generation. But if it's a 60 mile per hour wind, that happens once a year. That way, if you're irrigating properly, you're not going to get those trees kind of falling over and damaging property and stuff.
Yeah, and I noticed a lot of those trees that I noticed at Liberty Park, the root systems that came up were massive, but they were just spread out across a huge like square footage around the tree, and it wasn't they weren't deep at all.
No, they really aren't. And some of those trees have naturally shallow root systems anyway. Austrian pines aren't typically all that deep, and I think that was a lot of the conifers that were used up there. Cottonwoods. They don't really have deep root systems. They have a tendency to live along riverbanks anyway. But yeah, that was the thing that I noticed too, is that like all the root systems were, really shallow. And, again, it's just kind of goes to say like, you have to kind of, plant the tree in the right place. I think, sometimes you want to do things for aesthetics. Like Liberty Park is like wonderfully laid out. I love like the whole, trees along the sidewalks. And I think it looks absolutely amazing. But for people's yards, we don't necessarily need a landscape like that. Keep trees in planter beds, keep lawn where it needs to be. And you'll have less of these problems.
And irrigate the planter beds with drip instead of your lawn sprinklers, right?
Exactly. Because like lawn sprinklers, just they dump so much water over like a broad area, and you're just asking for trouble when you get windstorms like this.
Absolutely. A lot of the questions I've noticed that are coming in is so for example, people saying, well, I didn't lose my tree entirely, but a giant branch fell off. What do I do? And believe it or not, a lot of people really don't know what's the best thing to do if a branch comes off. What do you have to say about that?
Well, the first thing that I kind of want to say is that if you have a tree that's been damaged from this storm, and you're not sure exactly what to do with it, first and foremost, I would say maybe try to find an arborist to come out and maybe kind of assess the situation with the tree, because they're going to be able to look for things as, if it's like a potential hazard to property, like a house, car, maybe it's going to fall over. Maybe there's damage that's happened to the tree that we can't see just yet. So if you can, get an arborist out there to maybe take a look and see what the best thing is. I've had trees like out here at my nursery. I get some crazy winds at least a couple times a year. I've got some trees in the landscape here where the winds have actually pushed trees over just a little bit, so they're kind of leaning. And some of them we've kind of left. Some of them we're like, that thing's going to fall over. We're going to pull out. But that's something that I'm kind of trained to see. But when it comes to a lot of the branches getting damaged, like broken or anything, the best thing to do is if it's a split down the middle, because a lot of times trees have like weak crotches, and what I mean by weak crotches means that they grow more of like in a sharp V shape.
Yep.
A lot of times those branches are not very strong and they are very susceptible to breakage. If you don't have a good branching structure on your tree, it's going to be compromised. And really at that point, I would say, depending on how big the tree is, you're going to want to remove it.
Yeah.
Like the tree entirely. Again, consult an arborist. Don't just, listen to me on a podcast without somebody actually seeing the tree. But if you have like some like the non-main branches that are kind of broken, the best thing to do is to maybe try to make a clean cut at the branch collar, and that you don't need to cover it or anything like that. Trees are actually very good at healing their own wounds, or at least stopping the bleeding, so to speak. So just cut at the branch collar. You'll see like some little ringlets by like where a new branch starts. That's where you want to make the cut, and then just leave it alone. The tree will be able to take care of itself. So, but again, if you have major damage to a tree, contact an arborist, have them come out, take a look. There's a lot of good ones out there.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to be really, really busy lately.
Oh my gosh.
And what if their tree is on a park strip? I know that in many cases, the trees on some people's surrounding areas are owned by the city or managed by the city. And in that case, they really need to wait and contact the city, correct?
As long as there's not any, immediate threat to, property or power lines or anything like that. I think that you could still move it out of the way. As far as doing like an entire tree removal, I believe the cities will take care of the park strips. But I'm honestly not 100% sure how the cities are kind of working with that. I wonder if they're, and I think each city is probably going to be a little bit different. I think
that's true.
I would say maybe kind of call the city and find out what they're doing about it.
Yeah, I've seen a few posts from different cities. So maybe what I'll do is I'll post a couple. I'll put a few things in the episode notes that I found that if your trees are managed by sovereign land or by the city, then because I know for me the trees up against the river by my house, I do have to. It's not the city, but it's more sovereign land type.
Is it the county? Is it the county that?
Yeah, it's more like Salt Lake County Division of Sovereign Land, I believe, that I would contact. Luckily for me, I didn't have any damage, which I'm shocked. However, in the massive, massive early windstorm, I believe it was like 2 or 3 years ago, it was super early, really heavy snow, kind of took care of the pruning for us in a way, in that a lot of the branches that were a little bit, subjected to damage, they came down in that storm. So we just were able to kind of, like you mentioned earlier, make a clean cut and We rented a mulcher as soon as it got dry, and used them as wood chips in the garden. So
there you go. Yeah, keep recycle, keep it all self-contained. What is it, like self-sustainability?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I'm into that stuff. So that's exactly what we did. Although I will say some of those Russian olives have thorns on them. I actually stepped on one at the chicken coop the other day. It went right into my ankle. TMI, but I'm still limping a little bit.
Oh, I have also been there. I was one time when I was a lot younger. I had actually rolled a four-wheeler on top of myself into a grove of Russian olives and got stabbed by the Russian olives.
Oh my word! Oh, that's brutal.
Yep, wear a helmet, folks.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. What other questions? So I did see a question about what is it best to paint some kind of a sealant over branches that broke, and that's not a good idea, correct?
No, that's a terrible idea, in fact, because all you're doing at that point is just trapping bacteria and fungus, and then that's going to affect the tree in the long term. So you never really want to apply anything. You always want to leave like any wounds on a tree like open. The only exception to that I can think of is if you have like some like wounds that have like some bark and have like little crevices in them. Sometimes it's better to kind of peel the bark and kind of expose the wound. But typically speaking, you just want to take some pruners, chainsaw, whatever, make a clean cut, leave it alone.
Fantastic. So, well, you heard it here first, everybody.
Yeah, same concept as when you're pruning shrubs or roses or anything, just clean cuts. You don't put anything over them. So
that's right. The easy way is the way. Okay, well, when we come back right after this, we're going to have more on this topic, and we're also going to get into some fall prep tips. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me is Cameron Alcott with Progressive Plants. Thanks again for spending your free time with us, Cameron.
Oh, I love to do this. This is a very fun show that you have.
So we were talking a lot about what in the world, we just lost so many trees, and now a lot of our listeners are now faced with a bunch of different problems. What we still need to address is, as soon as the tree gets taken away, they've got a great big mound in the ground. Let's talk about some replacement trees. In some yards, we did lose some trash trees. So let's talk about maybe some beautiful replacements that our listeners can get excited about.
Oh man, they've come so far in breeding trees for the landscape at this point that there are so many that you can use. I know, back when a lot of these old trees that were planted, there's very limited, varieties of what they could do because you had to propagate them by seed or whatever. And nurseries now, they now do like a lot of grafting. They do like a lot of like weird genetic things to them to get like different effects out of them. So there's some really cool things, and a lot of them are do very, very well for Utah. And because that's one of the main things that I hear a lot is like, hey, I'm from California or from back east or whatever, and I don't know what to plant here because everything's so different.
Yeah.
And to replace a lot of these trees that have kind of fallen, I think there's a lot of opportunities here to really increase the biodiversity that we have. Because a lot of the issues that we were kind of talking about earlier with some of these trees is, I don't know, we talked about it a ton, but monoculture has a tendency to breed the same plant diseases. Like for instance, everybody's been planting sycamores because we have sycamores at the Capitol and downtown and everything. And the only thing that's really done is spread anthracnose throughout the valley because now every sycamore has it. So they never really look that good now because, with anthracnose being everywhere. So and they're working on trying to create different varieties of sycamores that are more resistant to anthracnose. Like ovation is one, and exclamation is another one. So those are newer versions of the sycamore that are more resistant to anthracnose. Because I did notice that there were a lot of sycamores that kind of came over, and I was thinking, that maybe that's because they're kind of in a weakened state because of the anthracnose, which a lot of time leads to sycamore scale, which just creates a whole lot of other issues. But one of the trees that I think that we should start using more and more of because they do so well in Utah are Zelkova trees. There are a lot of different types of Zelkovas. There's Village Green, there's Green Base, Musashino. One of my favorites, like Kiwi Sunset, that has some funky variegation to its leaves. Those are one of the best trees that I've ever seen for Utah because they're virtually no maintenance. They do fantastic here. And really the only thing that you have to do with them is clean up the leaves in the fall. And that's it. They don't really flower. They don't really drop any branches. They have a really good structure. They grow relatively quickly. And to me, they're one of like the ideal trees, especially if you want no frills. If you just want to plant it and go, Zelkovas are a great option. Doesn't really matter which one. Just pick a Zelkova that fits your space because some of them do get bigger than others. Some are really small. Some are really, really big, like 40, 50 feet. Pick one, run with it, have fun.
Well, and it's such a cool name. I need a Zelkova in my yard.
Yeah, no, like Kiwi Sunset's one of my favorites because it starts off with like orange new growth, and then it fades to like more of like a chartreuse or like a kind of like a lime green color, and then dark green on the center of the closer to the middle of the tree. And I think they look fantastic, most of the year. At this time of the year, it kind of fades to more of like a more dark green color. But for the first couple of weeks or the first couple of months of the year, I mean, it looks amazing.
Well, we'll put the we'll put some photos on Gardening Utah's Instagram page of Zelkovas.
If you lost like some flowering trees, for instance, I would maybe look towards some of the crab apples, especially if you really are intent on replacing the tree that came out of your lawn. I would really look at crab apples because they never really get that huge. And they're one of the few trees that can actually tolerate more wet feet. So when I say wet feet, I mean, if you're watering your lawn with the tree in it, crab apples have a tendency to tolerate that a lot better than any other tree. And if you get a variety like spring snow, for instance, spring snow has beautiful white flowers in the spring, orange bark. And the best part about that crabapple is that you have zero crabapple production.
Oh, really?
So they don't make any messes.
Aha.
So that's a really good one. If you have, garden beds where you lost some trees, you can look at any of the other crab apples like Indian Magic. Showtime is one of my favorites because I think we talked about it on another show that we did.
Yeah.
Because it has a great floral display. But a lot of people get concerned about, the crab apples and the potential mess that they can make. The biggest thing is that if you have it in a planter bed and the crab apples drop, who cares? It's in your planting bed. You don't see it on the sidewalk. It's not falling into your grass. Just let them fall there as organic matter. And a lot of crab apples are bred to have persistent fruit, which means the trees don't really let the fruit drop very much. So then birds will actually come by, pick off the fruits, and then, feed themselves. So it's a great way to attract wildlife too. So I would say, go for crab apples. Crab apples love Utah. They grow very, very well here, better here than pretty much any other state in the union.
Yeah.
And they do fantastic. Very few diseases that go after them. Pretty easy to do. Another tree that I really like that's really starting to gain momentum are Japanese tree lilacs. So these are lilacs that are trees, the same lilac type flowers. A lot of them are either white in color. I think there's one that's more of like a gold, it's called Beijing gold. But those do really well here too. They're not a big tree, but they are beautiful and a little bit unusual because they actually bloom in June. So it's a June blooming tree. You'll get about like 2-3 weeks out of it. They're really kind of neat. Again, they're not like, super huge, but they're a fantastic ornamental. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. Another shade tree that you might want to, think about too are some of the oaks. Oaks aren't really very common in Utah. It seems like we've kind of gone more like sycamores, maples, ash trees. But oaks have some of the strongest wood out of anything in the tree family, so they don't really break branches a ton. One of my favorite oaks is actually called a chinkapin oak. Okay. They get pretty tall, so I mean they're like a big shade tree. They have really like big leaves on them, and they're really just kind of unusual. And they grow in almost any type of soil conditions. They grow pretty fast. Acorn production hasn't been insane from what I've seen. And I think they're a fantastic tree. They're absolutely beautiful. Bur oaks are another one that have been working really well here in Utah. They actually work as high as like in Heber and Park City. They're used a lot up there.
Yeah, well, when we come back right after this break, we'll talk about, I want to ask you a little bit about some of the trees that I did see fall, those varieties that are really tall. We'll talk about some potential tall varieties that they can plant. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me here is Cameron Alcott from progressiveplants.com. Okay, so a lot of the trees that I noticed that came up, I saw a lot of Chinese elm, I saw a lot of cottonwood, and I saw a lot of evergreens. And a lot of these evergreens I noticed were really close up to homes, which some of it was good because then it had a lot of cushion when it got knocked over because it didn't damage the home too bad, but a lot of them are just planted way too close to the house. So let's talk about if someone's got to replace an evergreen, what are some varieties that you suggest?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. When people are planting, like traditional blue spruce or Austrian pines next to houses, I mean, when you buy them, they're so little. I mean, people don't realize how big they get. It's like kind of like when you have like a baby or something like that. You're holding this baby like, oh, it's so little, and then 20 years later, you're like, oh my gosh, you're huge. So I mean, there's there's some new varieties. I kind of mentioned earlier, there've been like some breeders who have been doing some pretty cool things. So if you've got really small areas, like if your planter beds are only 5 to maybe 6 feet wide, there are some evergreens that will actually do really well for you, I think. And I think cedars are one of those trees that people don't really look at a whole ton. There's some columnar blue atlas cedars that I think are really attractive because they're blue, which is kind of a neat color to have in the landscape. So you can do those. They only get maybe 6, 7, 8 feet wide, but this is like over the course of decades.
Yes.
So it's kind of ideal. Another really popular tree right now is a columnar Norway spruce. Those are fantastic. They only get about 6 feet wide and will get, the biggest ones that I've seen are about 25 to 30 feet tall. And they're really attractive, just a very columnar, almost kind of like a cylinder type shape. Absolutely fantastic. They grow they like to have well-drained soil. So they don't really particularly like to be grown in clay a whole lot. So, if you're on the west side or have that really hard pan clay, it may not be the ideal tree for you. If you are in that type of position, I would look at some of the pines. There's a pine that's called Arnold Sentinel. It's been kind of hard to find on the market, but they are very narrow. They will get around 20, 25 feet tall, only about maybe 5 to 6 feet wide is what we're thinking.
Perfect.
They're kind of new to the market, so we don't really know how wide they're going to get, but that's our best guess. There's actually a Mugo pine that is tall and skinny called Rostrata. It gets about 30 feet tall and about 10 feet wide. So not too crazy. There's another type of Austrian pine called Frank. It's about the same. It'll probably get 12 to 15 feet tall and maybe 5 feet wide. I've actually seen some Douglas fir that are columnar as well.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen those up in the mountains, they're absolutely beautiful. And so, if you're looking for evergreen type stuff, that's more what I would do. Just, work with the more columnar type varieties. If you've got the space in the yard and the bed space, you can go with your traditional varieties of evergreens that people would normally do. But in this day and age, with the lot sizes for houses as small as they are, there's really not a place for these trees. Nobody has 1 or 2 acre lots anymore. At least not in my tax bracket. But most of the houses that I've seen are small, quarter acre, something like that. And you need to get these smaller trees. Sometimes they're a little bit more expensive, but that's cheaper than pulling out a tree later because it got too big.
Absolutely.
So if you spend $300 on a tree now, anybody who's had a tree removal, as a lot of people are about to find out, they are, it could be like $1,000 to $2,000 to pull down a tree.
Yeah.
So this is where it's like very important to get the right tree for the right place. And if you're not sure exactly what to get, I mean, go to your independent garden center and go find somebody there who can help you. Pro tip, when you go to these independent garden centers, either find somebody who's been there for a very long time and not somebody who's just there for the summer.
Yes.
Okay. People who have been in the business for a long time, they generally kind of know what works and what doesn't. And that gets really important, regionally where you are. Like if, like a lot of people down in like Saratoga Springs, Eagle Mountain, those areas like west of Utah Lake, they have particular challenges down there. There's actually a nursery down there. I think it's Mountain View Nursery, I believe.
I think so.
The guy's name is, the owner's name is Dave. He's a really nice guy. I've talked to him a couple of times. He knows a lot about that region. And they're just right in Eagle Mountain. So, go Google them up and go see them. He's a really smart dude. So, so it's really just like understanding what you need to plant and where. I mean, that's where independent garden centers are absolutely phenomenal in giving you that information.
Totally agree, especially if, how far away do I plant this from my house? Because I see so many people just running to the, maybe the Lowe's or even Costco and just grabbing that blue spruce, and it's right by the window well, right up against the house, and it's just like, oh no.
I watch that train wreck all the time. I see like all these people just like going into the Home Depots and the Lowe's or whatever, just buying whatever's off the shelf there. And I'm like, those don't even grow here.
That's tough. It's always so difficult. And it's hard to not say anything when you're standing in line, like, oh boy, I hope she knows that that's not a perennial or whatever, it's hard to know stuff and then not share it.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know. Believe me, when I go to Home Depot and I just stroll through the garden center, I'm just like, I have to bite my tongue so much because I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I just don't want people to waste money either, knowing that, what they're buying won't live the way that they think it will. But maybe they do, and it's a decoration. Who knows?
You know what? If people want to buy rhododendrons and use them as an annual, that's fine.
Yep.
As long as they understand that.
Totally. That beautiful azalea that that's going to be great for until, in some cases, the other day when it mysteriously froze all of a sudden.
Right. Well, here's something for you. So my mother, she has an azalea that's 27 years old.
Wait. In Utah?
Yeah. You heard me.
Inside or outside?
Outside. In the ground.
What?
Yep.
It's
not pretty, mind you.
Oh, I was going to say, is it an improved, proven winter variety available at Progressive Plants?
No. It's my mom just has a special talent of making things live.
Unreal. Does she cover it or do anything special?
No.
Oh, my word.
Nope. She just found a spot. It's a little microclimate in her yard. Apparently, it's acidic enough. Does okay. It flowers. It smells good when it does flower. But every once in a while, plants kind of surprise me. I'll just see things that there's no way that it's going to grow here, like in my mind, and then it finds a way. Like a couple of years ago, I went to had a client who had me come out to their house to get some ideas for their yard, and they had a tree that was blooming, and it was blooming pink, and it had these beautiful pink flowers on it. And it took me a second. I was like, "That's a dogwood. That is a Cherokee pink dogwood." And I've never seen those outside of Georgia. And it was gorgeous. It looked amazing. And I just, this was around 13th East and 104th South and Sandy. I mean, it looked amazing. Yeah.
Wow. I wonder if it still looks amazing.
If it didn't get uprooted.
Yeah, no kidding.
Storm.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the questions we got a lot that I saw a lot of this week in the Utah Gardeners group is, if I just lost a massively tall tree like a cottonwood, what in the world can you replace it if you're expecting to have that quick growing height?
My first inclination is to go to an elm. A lot of times people are like afraid to do elm trees because they've heard of this, horrific disease called Dutch elm disease that wiped out the majority of elm trees in the United States through the middle to latter part of the 20th century. But they've been working really hard at developing elms that have resistance to Dutch elm disease. The same way that they've been working with, like sycamores and London plane trees with anthracnose. They're constantly doing that type of stuff. Elm trees, I feel, are not used enough. They grow extremely fast. They get huge, and I'm talking like 50 to 70 feet huge.
Wow.
Whether or not we see that in our lifetimes, it's hard to say, but they do grow very, very fast. My only complaint with elms is that they kind of go through like an awkward teenage phase when they're little. But after they've been in the ground for about 5 years, they take on a beautiful shape. Very, very statuesque, very stately. There's a reason why they used them to line streets back east, 100 years ago, before Dutch elm disease kind of tore them all out. But they are a fantastic, fast-growing tree that look amazing. They have very few problems. And so if you're just trying to get like big giant windbreaks, I would say look at some of the elms. There's a whole bunch of them, like what is there? There's like Lewis and Clark. There's Valley Forge. Yeah, there's a ton of elms that you can do.
Okay, so we have a minute and a half left of this episode, and we want to talk real quick about the best way to plant. Because a lot of these trees, when they do replace them, are going to come with the burlap, and then they're, do they amend the soil? And you had a really great tip about that.
Well, the soil amendments, I think, is probably the biggest thing that I want to address. I've never subscribed to the theory that you need to amend the soil to improve it, because really the only thing that you're doing is delaying the inevitable. Like the roots of that tree are going to get into the native soil no matter what. There's nothing that you can do to stop that. If there is an incompatibility with that tree in the native soil, you're delaying it by a year tops. Okay. The other thing too is that if you amend the soil and the consistency of what you are planting in is different than the native soil around you, you can create what's called like a bathtub effect, which means you'd water the tree and it's going to look like it's dry when you look at it from the top, but the reality is it's going to be collecting water down the bottom because it can't percolate through the, like the hard pan clay soil. And then you end up inadvertently overwatering the tree because the roots aren't ever grabbing hold to anything, and you end up killing the tree. That's one of the top reasons why you lose trees within about a year or two. Is because, a lot of people will go and amend that soil and just, create that bathtub type of effect where the top looks dry and then the bottom's just collecting water. So the best thing to do, dig a big hole, but use the native soil as that backfill. And if you want to use organic material, just make sure that you put that on the top, because as it decomposes, it's going to leach through and slowly enrich the soil. Like building good soil takes years. Yeah. It doesn't happen overnight. So you constantly have to be putting that organic matter in there to improve the soil around it.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Cameron.
You're welcome.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Gardening Utah. Thanks so much to Cameron Alcott from ProgressivePlants.com for coming on the show and giving of his free time. He's always so willing to come onto the show and answer listeners' questions and really give of his amazing expertise to all of us. And he was a little too humble to say on the show, but you can buy trees and ornamental shrubs from ProgressivePlants.com. Check it out. A lot of the things that we talked about in the show, they have available, maybe not right this second, but many times of the year. So definitely check them out. And when you support our sponsors, you support this show. I'd also like to thank Harvest Gold Organics for being a sponsor of this show. You can check them out at harvestgoldsilica.com. Join us next week. We are going to have an action-packed show. We're going to be giving you all the tips and tricks for fall cleanup, fall planting, everything you need to know as we head into the fall. Shout out to our producer, Lambo. Thanks so much again for listening. I'm Jana Francis. We'll see you next week on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.